The Addams Family Chronicles continue. Chapter 12. So You Want to Be a Playboy. Sometime during the summer of 1968, something serendipitous happened, at least for the three Addams boys. It was an opportunity for them to explore something that everybody learns about sooner or later: sex. Of course, parents prefer their children to be older than 7 or 10 or even 13. But those were the exact ages of Eric, Keith, and Lynn when fate intervened. Mom was working on her master's degree at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. It was commonplace for the Addams family to spend summers there in the mid-60s, and she would finally complete her degree in the summer of 1969. But still, she was a year away from bringing her scholarly dream to fruition. Dad had already completed his master's degree in school administration from Northeastern State University in Tahlequah 2 summers prior, and his investment was already paying dividends, as he was being considered for the job of superintendent at Glencoe, a small-sized school district 20 minutes from Stillwater. In the interim, however, the family was housed in the married student housing at Oklahoma State for the summer, while Mom attended classes. This was a boon for the Addams children, because higher learning institutions bring with them a diverse mix of people and influences. It would prove to be quite an education for the boys. Because of the demands of class and study, the boys were often left alone to their own devices. This gave them time to explore the campus extensively. One such place of interest to the boys was the dumpster, since there was always something discarded that the boys could use for their entertainment. Aluminum pie pans made great frisbees. Glass bottles were always fun to break. Rubber bands could be used for rubber band wars. It was a veritable playground. But it was an old paper sack that caught Lynn's attention one evening, which would prove to be the mother lode of all dumpster delights. It was full of magazines, Playboy magazines, 14 in all. What a gold mine. It was something that aroused strange and glorious feelings as he gazed at the pictures of half-clothed women. He looked around cautiously, knowing that this was a secret he must keep to himself, shoving his guilt aside in favor of his fascination. He closed the magazine and pushed it back inside the sack as he headed back to the dormitory, wondering where to hide his treasure once he arrived. The hard part, he surmised, would be getting them to his room without answering any unwanted questions. The rest would be simple. The plan worked perfectly. He stashed the sack underneath the outdoor stairs before venturing in to survey the situation. Mom was at the laundromat with Alicia and Eric. Dad wasn't home either. Keith was the only one there. He hurried back out and gathered the sack under his arm and went straight to the room that all 4 children shared. Of course, Keith was not without curiosity when Lynn carried the sack into the room. "What's in the sack?" he asked innocently, unaware that his naive life, too, would soon be altered by the carnal knowledge of worldly lust and desire. Lynn was torn with the options that were before him. Telling Keith might lead to Mom or Dad finding out, but containing his enthusiasm proved even more daunting. "You just won't believe it." Lynn dumped the sack on the bed and pulled out the magazines. There was a picture of a topless blonde on the cover. Keith's eyes opened wide as he opened it and perused the pictures on the pages in between. "You know, we can't tell anyone else about this, especially not Eric. He'll tell. We have to keep them hidden at all times. There are 14 magazines in all. You can keep 7, and I'll keep 7. Deal? Deal! Keith was ecstatic. He knew just where he'd hide them, in his duffel bag where he kept his socks and underwear. No one would think to look there. And after the two of them browsed through the pages, the books were stowed there and stuffed underneath the bed in the far corner of the room. A week passed by, and the family moved to Glencoe to start their new life there. Keith and Eric were to share a room together in one of the small bedrooms of their mobile home. And once they were settled in, it was no time at all before young Eric encountered the magazines. "Where did you get these?" he asked as he thumbed through the pages, wide-eyed with adrenaline rushing through his vasculature. The story of the dumpster was recounted. Keith told young Eric that he had wanted to tell him, but that Lynn wouldn't allow it, warning that this secret must be kept at all cost. Lynn kept the best magazines for himself. There are even 2 pictures in one of his books that show the P. Eric's mouth dropped open. "You can't tell anyone about it. I keep them here in the duffel bag underneath the bed. You can look at them, but don't get caught." There was silence between them as Eric contemplated his role in the conspiracy, custodian of information that must surely be kept clandestine. Days went by, and the secret continued intact. It wasn't as hard as he had thought, keeping it from all the others. In fact, Eric enjoyed the power he felt, knowing something that others didn't. Yet he never talked about it to Lynn. He often thought that he'd sneak into Lynn's room and try to find his hiding spot. After all, he had magazines with new pictures, and according to Keith, they were even better than the ones he'd already seen. But if Lynn were to catch him touching any of his stuff, it would surely mean a beating. So, discretion ruled young Eric's actions in this regard, and he never ventured into Lynn's room for any reason. Then one evening, as Keith and Eric were playing cards together in their cramped bedroom, Mom walked in and sat down. "What are you boys doing?" It was an innocent question, but one that seemed to portend some ulterior motive. "Nothing. Just playing Go Fish. You got any 7s?" Eric asked, and Keith shook his head as prompting a card draw from the deck. "I got a 7!" Eric declared proudly as he began to ask again. "You got any—" Mom interrupted before he could finish his turn. "Let's see, what do you have in this duffel bag underneath the bed?" Mom asked the question knowingly as she reached for the handles and pulled the bag into her lap. Fear clutched them both as Keith attempted to intervene by reaching for the bag, spilling the deck of cards into the floor. Nothing, just some socks and underwear, Mom." He grabbed a handle, but Mom was unwilling to let him take it, as she deftly unzipped it and exposed the contents to them all. The white-faced boys slowly turned to a shade of nausea green, recognizing that the worst-case scenario that they had so dreaded was now upon them. "Aha! Playboy! Are you all Playboys?" The boys were like silent sheep waiting for slaughter. "Where did you get these?" She asked the question like she already knew the answer. Her attitude was not one of derision, however, but by the way she asked the question, the boys knew that lying was not an alternative. Young Eric piped up, as immunity was all he could hope for. "Lynn found them in the dumpster in Stillwater. He still has some, and 2 that show the P." Mom almost laughed at Eric's attempt to throw himself at the mercy of the court, while pushing the other 2 boys under the wheels of the runaway bus. "This is not the way you learn about sex," she started. "If there's anything you want to know about sex, ask me, and I'll do my best to answer any questions you have about it. This is presented in a dirty way, and you're still too young to look at pictures like these. If you don't feel comfortable talking to me about sex, then you can talk to your father. Sex is something not to feel guilty about, but is to be enjoyed between married people. You'll understand that when you both are older. I'll talk to Lynn about it later. That summer was certainly an awakening of sorts for the Addams boys. It is a story as old as man, when Eve tempted Adam with the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. To gain knowledge, one must surrender something, be it some personal perspective on life, or simply the time it takes to achieve the understanding. In this case, the knowledge they gained demanded that a piece of their innocence be lost forever, with no hope of ever reclaiming it. Chapter 13: Life and Death on the Farm. Alexander was great. History teaches us this. But looking back, being either faster or more submissive might have saved his life. You see, Alexander was a pig. He was a real pig. He was happy, as young pigs are, and along with his companion, Howard, they were in the custody of a young 15-year-old freshman named Lynn Addams, member of the Future Farmers of America chapter at Glencoe, Oklahoma. The Addams family, especially the children, enjoyed having the two of them around, and having pigs as pets was a new experience for them all. Dad had raised a few head of cattle when the family had lived in Twin Oaks, Oklahoma, so it seemed logical that pig farming wouldn't be that much different. Fate, however, would not shine brightly on this endeavor. The piglets grew quickly. Lynn did a good job of taking care of Howard and Alexander. He was charged with every aspect of their care. He was to be graded on this project, and he wanted to do everything right. And in the course of time, he grew close to his livestock. Unfortunately, he knew there would come a day when the pigs would be on the dinner table. And although the visit to the abattoir seemed a long way off, each time he ruminated on their plight, he pushed the anxiety back into that place where dark thoughts such as this often reside. Most male pigs face a most unpleasant rite of passage. They must be castrated to be more easily managed and for their meat to remain tender. And so it was this day that Dad, armed with a knife and kerosene, gathered his three boys and headed down to the pig pen. Pigs are said to be the smartest of farm animals, and Howard and Alexander's immediate sense of peril would have made even George Orwell proud. As soon as Lynn opened the gate, the pigs bolted from the enclosure. Keith and young Eric were the first to give chase. It was quite a spectacle to see as Dad and his son scurried across the pasture in pursuit of the young swine. After what seemed like 15 minutes of hard running, Dad finally seized a back leg of young Alexander, holding him just long enough for the three boys to fall on him. Panting and out of breath, Dad pulled the knife from his pants pocket. Lynn laid his body across the pig's torso, wheezing from his asthma, while young Keith and young Eric each had a hind leg, exposing the young shoat's scrotum. With the first cut, Alexander's agony was evident as he flailed his back hooves in Dad's direction. "Hold him still!" Dad yelled as he plucked a testicle from the sack, eliciting a screech from the helpless razorback. Blood was now abundantly pulsating from the wound as Dad fingered his way to the second gonad and snapped it out. Another horrific squill ensued as poor Alexander's eyes rolled back into his head behind his long white eyelashes. Dad poured the coal oil liberally over the piglet's bloody groin. He got up, still winded, and the boys looked up at their father, as if seeking permission to release their grip on the bleeding animal. "Okay, let him up. Go get Howard." Dad uttering this sentence evoked polarizing emotions in the boys, as the relief of hearing the first part was quickly vanquished by the dread of repeating this ordeal with Howard, who was much bigger and stronger than Alexander. The boys got up, releasing their grip on the little porker. But the pig didn't move. He was now a bloody mess, still hemorrhaging profusely from the incision. The boys looked to their father for direction when it became obvious that the pig would not get up. Lynn's eyes were now welling with tears as he watched the ground around Alexander's twitching backside accumulate more and more blood. "Dad, is Alexander going to be okay?" Lynn's voice shook as his bottom lip quivered. He never could have imagined such an outcome when he undertook this project. Dad didn't answer. He just started back toward the house with the jar of kerosene. An awkward silence persisted among the boys in their father's absence, as they tarried with the dead piglet, each reflecting on the event independently. Howard didn't get castrated that day, much to the comfort of the boys. Lynn wasn't kicked out of the FFA either. What Lynn and the boys got that day was a heaping teaspoonful of life and death. Events such as these make up the fabric of our being and serve us well when the need arises to draw from them. Howard would ultimately meet his demise at the butcher and make his way to the breakfast table at the Addams family household, just like Alexander. And after breakfast, the Addams family all agreed Alexander was great. Chapter 14. A Pocketful of Pins. Manson was on the loose in 1969. He committed some heinous acts. But there was a third grader living in Glencoe, Oklahoma that year that could have easily fallen into such a life of crime had it not been for his God-fearing, law-abiding mother. The day was overcast, a typically cold weekend day in the middle of winter. The Addams family lived within walking distance from the Glencoe Elementary School, but then again, everything was within walking distance in this small prairie town of 250 inhabitants. The school had everything to entertain a 7-year-old child on a skateboard with his friends. Sidewalks, outdoor courts, playground equipment. So it seemed a natural attraction for a group of boys looking for somewhere to spend the afternoon. The three boys, Mark Choplin, Timothy Stokes, and young Eric Adams, set out with their boards in hand toward the school. Of course, the school grounds were deserted, giving the boys free rein of all the facilities. They first played on the outdoor basketball courts, racing around, playing all sorts of made-up games. Who was the fastest? Who could knock the other off the skateboard while remaining on their own board? Who could go farthest with a single push? But as kids are, they soon tired of these games and decided to use the sidewalks that encircled the buildings themselves. Gliding by the classrooms where they spent Monday through Friday didn't offer much appeal. But when they rolled past the door to the cafeteria, Mark jiggled a knob on the door and it opened. Wow! All of a sudden, the possibilities were endless. The first thing the boys did was look around for any sign of life. None. It was straight to the chocolate milk. Chocolate milk was something the Addams family didn't have very often, and young Eric was going to have his fill. And after finishing 2 half-pint cartons each, the boys ventured down into the band room, which was beneath the cafeteria. It was more fun on a concrete floor inside, racing around the chairs, because the biting wind no longer was a concern. Round and round they raced, until once again, boredom overtook them. "Hey, let's go back up to the cafeteria for more milk," young Eric begged. So the three of them went back upstairs, grabbed another carton of chocolate milk, and spied the door from the cafeteria that led to the 5th grade classroom. It was open. Another opportunity for exploring was upon them. The room was dark and quiet. Now, the game turned into a secret spy episode, where the boys looked into the student desks for spyware and the like. All it took was one look for young Eric into one of the desks on the front row. There, in a nice, new plastic case, were several markers of assorted beautiful colors. Eric could hardly contain his joy. He imagined all sorts of wonderful drawings he could create with these accoutrements. It seemed only logical that the person these pens belonged to wouldn't miss them much. And besides, he was sure he could draw better than just about anybody. Who deserved them more? Even though he heard a little voice inside his head whispering to him not to steal them, there was a louder shout rationalizing that this was acceptable behavior. Young Eric clandestinely snatched several of his favorite colors and thrust them into the front pocket of his jeans. "Let's go," Eric said in a half-whispered tone. It was getting late in the afternoon anyway, so the three picked up their boards and started home. Eric was wondering how he might explain ownership of his new pens to anyone who might ask, but the chance of such a question being asked seemed so remote that he dismissed the possibility straight away. A treat was in store for young Eric upon his return home. Mom had made a plate full of donuts, the homemade yeast kind that moms are famous for, with a powdered sugar glaze that was good all by itself. Of course, young Eric dug in with the rest of his siblings. In the Addams family household, fast eating was a must, lest one be prevented from getting their fair share. The plate of 24 donuts was gone in 5 minutes, and young Eric managed to get at least 4 of them. Now, Lost in Space was coming on, and everyone retired to the living room to enjoy the show. Now, a big meal can make a young boy tired, and it wasn't 15 minutes into the show that young Eric lay down across his mother's lap and sleep befell him. And at the conclusion of the show, Mom aroused her youngest boy and began undressing him for bed. As she pulled his pants off and slipped them off his ankles, the magic pens tumbled from his pocket and scattered across the linoleum floor. Eric's slumbering eyes spontaneously snapped wide open as the cognizance of Mom's impending revelation spawned panic throughout his half-clothed body. Nausea followed. "Eric, where did you get these pens?" The question hung heavy in the air amid the silence of young Eric's brainstorm. I found them down by the road. Some kid must have lost them," he speculated. It sounded like a pretty good off-the-cuff rebuttal to him, but his glibness would again be tested by her cross-examination, this time offered more threateningly. "Eric, you didn't find these down by the road. They're too clean and new. Where did you get these pens?" The gig was up. Young Eric told her what she wanted to know, the whole truthful story. "On Monday morning, you will take these back to the teacher and apologize for taking them. Do you understand, young man?" Eric was now on the verge of illness. Why couldn't Mom take them back to her? But at this point, any argument would have been mere folly. Monday came after a sleepless night for poor Eric. His mother knew that he might need some persuasion, so she accompanied him to the school early before the first bell rang. The teacher had playground duty, so she was easy to find. There, in front of God and peers, young Eric made his confession in a meek and shaky voice. "Miss Iva, I took these pens from a desk in your classroom. I'm sorry." He was looking down at the ground, almost sobbing as the broken words came out, selfishly unaware of the embarrassment that this was causing his mother. The teacher could tell how difficult it was for him as she looked at Mom with an awkward, knowing glance. "Well, Eric, It takes a big man to admit this. You were right in coming here and returning those pins. I'm very I'm very proud of you. I wish we had more young men like you here in our school." And that was that. The load had been lifted, and young Eric ran away to his homeroom class. Those pins were not the only thing that he would steal in his lifetime, but it laid the groundwork for an appreciation of the difference between right and wrong. Certainly, there's a fine line between the felons of the world and those like young Eric. But because he had someone who cared enough to stand with him that day on the playground, the world may have been spared another Charles Manson.